So it's the 19th of November 2019, and I've just watched the first general election debate of this 2019 general election, and it was held in Salford by ITV, and the moderator was Julie Etchingham. Firstly, a quick word about actually debates themselves and whether or not they can make a difference. I think the thing is, in this country, it's still a relatively new phenomenon. We've only had four general elections within the last decade where there have been televised debates. Unlike most other Western countries, we don't really have a tradition of that. So it's still a relatively new phenomenon compared to, for example, the United States, where it's been going on for almost 60 years from that first Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960. But um, as a format, I am broadly supportive of it if it's done right. And tonight's format I thought was mostly good, except one little issue I'm not so sure I like is having a live studio audience and having a select number of them ask questions. The idea obviously is to kind of get a cross section of society, but actually it's a pretty privileged position for that studio audience to be in. And I thought they were at times a little bit irritating as a viewer because you got kind of heckling and it was a little bit rowdy at times, and I think that just distracts. That's a downside to the televised format because it can give a kind of bias um, that may not reflect the wider national picture. Um, As a moderator, I think Julie Etchingham done a pretty good job. I'd give her 8 out of 10 because it's a very pressurizing position to be in. I watched an interview on ITV in which she was discussing with two colleagues about the pressures that she was under and the sort of things to expect. She's done it before. She's an experienced journalist, but I think overall she handled it well. I'd give her 8 out of 10. She was firm, but she was polite. She was balanced. I don't think anyone can accuse her of being pro Johnson or pro Corbyn. I think she was balanced. The only thing I would say is I think she maybe could have reprimanded the audience at 1 or 2 points when they were blatantly. Like there was one point I heard one guy saying, "Oh, here we go," and it was pretty loud. I mean, to me, that's just distracting. I think it was a rebuke to Corbyn, but there was a few points against Johnson as well. And like I say, it just creates a sense of that's what the audience feels, but is that what the country feels? So I think it's a little bit like canned laughter. You know, do you believe canned laughter makes something funny or not? So I've mixed views about the audience concept. Although I guess to have it just the two leaders and a room and the moderator might be a bit dull. But anyway, I've taken notes sort of to prepare for this video because obviously I was going to make a video about this. So just picked up some notes. My gut feeling is overall, um, Corbyn performed slightly stronger, I would say. And my reasoning for that is I think it was overall a little bit more on point. And I think that he stuck to the questions more directly overall. Not all of them, and I'll come to that in a minute. But one woman asked, for example, about mudslinging in politics, and I think of the two leaders on a personal basis, I think Corbyn's the more mature as a character. That doesn't mean I trust Corbyn. That doesn't mean I support Corbyn. I have serious misgivings about Jeremy Corbyn. In point of fact, I have serious misgivings about both these leaders, and I think that they are polar opposites. I mean, polar opposites. You could barely get two more different leaders, except perhaps Farage Corbyn showdown. But it started off pretty polite. It was Mr. Corbyn and the Prime Minister. It was pretty cordial and polite. Then it got a little bit rough and tumble at several points. Um, I mentioned I thought Julie Etchingham was a good moderator. I do, but there was one point halfway through there was a thing about civility, and she got them to shake hands. Now I understand what she was doing, but halfway through just seemed a bit silly at that point. I think it would have been better at the end. Okay, so I think the main weaknesses of the two leaders was that Corbyn was still vague on Brexit. He's talking about having another referendum after 6 months, having a deal after 3 months, having a referendum on 6 months. But he would not lay out his personal views and his personal position, and this matters because if he was the prime minister, he would be guiding the direction. So I think that's a serious problem. He says Labour's been clear. I would dispute that. I think a lot of people really don't know where Labour stands. I mean, they're talking about a second referendum now, but there's indication that Corbyn has been a Eurosceptic in the past. So I think that's a big problem. Brexit and the NHS were the two major issues that came up tonight. There was no attention on crime, no attention on immigration, little attention on education. So it was almost entirely dominated by Brexit and the NHS, a little bit on climate change. So that was maybe a mistake. I know it was going to be, you can't avoid Brexit, but I feel it was a little bit too dominated by those two subjects. I think overall Corbyn got louder applauses, but again, that's the bias of the studio audience system. I'm sure they would have got a mixed audience, but Salford is obviously a northern city. Whether that was a factor or not, I don't know. Um, let's see. So there was one point quite early on when Johnson got visibly angry, and Johnson doesn't often get visibly angry, but he was clearly quite angry when Corbyn actually brought out some sort of paperwork and was accusing Johnson of getting into a deal with the Americans on selling the NHS. Johnson got visibly irritated by that. And for his part, Corbyn got annoyed about Johnson's allegations that he would get into a deal with the SNP, and he retorted, "We've had 9 years of coalition with the Tories," which is technically not true. It was 5 years of the Tory Lib Dem coalition. Um, I think again they evaded certain questions. I mean, Corbyn wouldn't always answer directly, particularly on the Brexit questions, and I think that's an issue. Yeah, he was talking about having another referendum, but he would not lay out his personal position, and I think that's problematic. Um, yeah, I think he missed an opportunity there. But one thing I found notable was when Julie Etchingham talked about personal trust matters. She picked up the issue of anti-Semitism in Labour. Now, whatever you think of Corbyn's position on that, he did directly answer the question. He said that it's a great evil that the Jewish people have been persecuted for much of the 20th century. He said that as leader, he has expelled members who have been found guilty of anti-Semitism. So he directly answered the question. Now, whether or not that's true is another matter, but he did directly answer the question. When it came to Johnson's turn, his question was about promising 40 times to deliver Brexit or making promises 40 times on Brexit deals. He didn't answer the question. He just kind of deflected and went into the attack on Corbyn around the anti Semitism issue. My own stance on this, and I don't want to get into too many details in this video, but I think there is a real problem in Labour ranks with that, particularly from certain Islamists who are sympathetic to Corbyn. But for Johnson to deflect that, I thought was a cop out. That was not impressive. Corbyn answered the question, Johnson didn't, and that was an important question. So that was noticeable. Um, Corbyn made a personal anecdote about a friend of his, a woman who died actually yesterday of breast cancer. So that was, I think it's always humanises leaders when they bring personal issues, personal experiences into it. Um, okay, there was one point where Johnson got laughed at, literally, when he said, "Look at what I've delivered." Now, obviously, what he's referring to is his mayoralty of London, but I think he hadn't really reckoned on the fact that people will immediately think failed Brexit promises. We will leave come hell or high water on October the 31st. So that's definitely an Achilles heel for Johnson. I mean, he was literally laughed at. Corbyn, one of his talking points was society of billionaires and the very poor, both of which are wrong. Julie Etchingham, she asked them about the magic money tree, and in the case of Corbyn, maybe several magic money trees, so that came up. On the issue of the royal family, obviously with the scandal around Prince Andrew, or rather his response to that much talked about interview, single sentence answer, Jeremy Corbyn, it needs a bit of improvement and nobody is above the law. Now, Corbyn got quite a big applause when he said, before we talk about Prince Andrew, let's talk about his victims. He got significant applause for that. Johnson's response to monarchy are above reproach. Really? Now, I personally have a problem with that answer because they're not above reproach. Corbyn's right about that. Nobody is above criticism. And I'm saying that as a royalist. I just think that seemed a little bit sycophantic on Johnson's part. And some conservatives do have this mentality that sort of are a bit sycophantic about the royal family. Well, the whole thing about Prince Andrew's maybe for another video, but he didn't come across that well in the interview that he'd done. I mean, he should have expressed more direct sympathy for the victims, and he didn't. And Johnson just seemed to totally miss that. He said, of course, we should feel sorry for sympathise with the victims, but the monarchy is above reproach. I really disagree with that. Climate change. Johnson got quite a bit of applause when he said it's an issue for the whole world, not just for Britain. And Corbyn, very direct, said it is the main issue. Whether you agree with that or not, it was a direct answer. Interesting question. Which world leader do you most admire? I feel this was maybe a trick question to try and get Johnson to say Trump and try and get Corbyn to say some communist dictator or some autocrat in South America. And neither fell into the trap. Johnson surprisingly said, I like the EU 27 because they did a fantastic deal. Johnson's also been careful to say our friends in the EU. Corbyn, Antonio Guterres, because he's trying to bring the world together, the UN Secretary General. The last question was a humorous one, kind of a bit of comic relief, I guess. Young guy asked them, non-politically, what would you give each other for a Christmas present? Corbyn's answer I thought was quite witty. I know Mr. Johnson likes reading, so I would give him a Christmas Carol. I mean, the insinuation there is obvious, but it was quite a witty answer. Johnson said he would give him a copy of his Brexit deal, which obviously was political. So I have to be honest. Overall, my gut feeling is Corbyn came across a little bit stronger. He did evade questions, particularly on Brexit. But believe it or not, I'm one of many people who think there are other issues beyond Brexit, as much as it is such an important issue. I think that ultimately Corbyn has more personal empathy and compassion for the most vulnerable in society. I do. I have serious misgivings about Corbyn's foreign policy, and that wasn't brought up at all outside of Brexit. I mean, there was absolutely zero sort of mention of, for example, our role in international terrorism or humanitarian intervention, military intervention. I mean, we're not in any active war right now, but it's potentially a major issue. So I think more issues could have been brought up. But overall, I thought it was less messy than some of those 2015 and 2017 debates. So I like that fact. I like the fact it was one on one. I really don't know what the SNP is complaining about in this sense because Nicola Sturgeon, it's not only that she isn't going to be Prime Minister, she doesn't want to be Prime Minister. Joe Swinson perhaps has a bit more ground to complain because the Lib Dems are the third biggest party in England. The Brexit Party might say otherwise, but in terms of MPs. So overall, it was quite a good event. But few things I would have changed. I think the audience, there was a bit of heckling at times, and it was a bit distracting. I think that both men did evade certain questions, but I think overall, my gut feeling is Corbyn performed a bit stronger. That doesn't mean that I am supportive of Jeremy Corbyn. I've got serious misgivings, but just on tonight, I would say he performed a bit stronger. So let me know your thoughts if you watched it.